Good afternoon. This is the last of the presentations for the lab on tissues, and it is going to be about connective tissue identification. So we've done epithelial tissue, and now we're going to focus on connective tissue. And the first set of slides will obviously be about connective tissue, and then we'll finish up with muscle tissue. So let's begin, and we'll start with areolar connective tissue. Okay, so areolar connective tissue consists of all the three different fiber types. So we have elastic fibers, we have reticular fibers, and we have collagen fibers. So all three types of fibers are present. We have a variety of different cells. We have the fibroblasts, and we have a number of other cells which they're not showing here. Well, there's one, there's a mast cell. So it is basically the typical view of of connective tissue. That is, when you see an example of the characteristics of connective tissue, they typically are showing you areolar connective tissue. So let's move on to the next slide. So again, this is a drawing showing you the same thing, except now it's an artist. So we have our elastic fibers, and these can be seen here in purple. We have the reticular fibers, which are the larger tan ones, and the largest of the fibers, the collagen fibers, are the big blue ones here, here, and here. So a mixture of all those. Plus we have plasma cells. We have fibroblasts. These are the actual cells that are producing the fibers and the extracellular matrix. We have mast cells. These are part of your immune system. So we have a variety of plasma cells. We've talked about those. So a variety of different tellies. These are macrophages here. Again, so a lot of different types of cells. And that's typical for most connective tissue. So here it is. Areolar connective tissue. You can see that it is widely distributed in the body. So it's the most widely distributed connective tissue in the body. That is something you should probably keep track of. Consists of the fibers, collagen, elastic, reticular, arranged in a random way. So they're very random in their orientation. Several kinds of cells. And the semi-fluid ground substance is a hyaluronic acid, chondroitin sulfate, and dermatan sulfate, and keratin sulfate. So that's a combination of different ingredients to make up the ground substance, which is the extracellular material surrounding the fibers. Let's look at the next one. So this is basically the same thing. We've talked about this already. Here is location. So there are many places within the body where we find this. The subcutaneous layer deep to the skin, the papillary superficial region of the dermis of the skin, the lamina propria of the mucous membrane. This is the same thing as a basement membrane. So when you see that term lamina propria, think basement membrane. That's what it is. Okay, around blood vessels, nerves, and body organs. So very widely distributed. Its function is strength, elasticity, and support. And I would add it's going to be a glue. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but let's see if I can do it. Yeah, look at that. I'm so good. Okay, glue. Right. So it is also a glue. It glues things together inside the body. All right, well, let's move on. And here are some examples. So I'm not going to ask you to identify specific types of fibers. That's not what I will do. So when you look at this, you should be able to see that's areolar connective tissue. Now, if you want to know these larger fibers that you see here, that's my collagen fibers there. The smallest of the fibers that you're seeing here, the very smallest, those would be the reticular fibers. And then the elastic fibers are somewhere in between. But as I said, don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to ask you to identify which fibers are which. Here's another typical view. So let me tell you a little bit about how these slides are made, because this will make a lot more sense to you when you're looking at this. So these are called smear slides. What do I mean by that? I mean that we've taken the tissue, in this case areolar connective tissue, and we smear it across the surface of the slide, much like you take a pat of butter and smear it across your toast. So it gets all spread out. And when that happens, you really are destroying the original shape of the tissue. So this tissue is much more densely packed than what you're seeing here. But because we smeared it across the surface of the slide, we can expose then the different fibers that you find, and we get a better sense of what it's composed of. And we just simply put this on the slide. The density of this material will be such that it'd be very difficult to actually see any details under the microscope. So again, here's typical view. The larger fibers are the collagen fibers, and we also see cells. What kind of cells? Can't really tell you. If a cell is connected to a fiber, looks like this one right here, for example, that's probably a fibroblast. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you what kind of cells these are. And I wouldn't ask you to identify that. Just know that there are many different types of cells found in this tissue. So again, another example, this would definitely be collagen fibers. And any cell that's connected to that would be a fibroblast. So, and it's hard sometimes to know what is exactly the cell. That looks like it's a cell right there. It's probably a fibroblast. But beyond that, I can't really tell you what these cells are. Again, just a bunch of different views. Here's a nice, that is most definitely a fibroblast. You can see it's connected to this, this fiber here. Okay, so I've shown you a lot of different views because it shows up in a lot of different ways, but the same basic pattern is being seen here. You get this crisscrossing, different size fibers and scattering of cells, and that's your basic view for areolar connective tissue. Let's move on. We'll talk about adipose tissue now. And adipose tissue kind of breaks the rule. When we talk about connective tissue, we talk about scattered cells in a matrix. So this type of tissue really is the exception to the rule, because as you can see, the cells are rather closely packed together. Okay, so there's one right there, and then right next to it is another one. So there is a lot of densely packed cells in this picture. And that's just the way that adipose tissue is put together. It is still considered to be connective tissue, despite that fact. Another thing that you'll see associated with this tissue, more so than other types of connective tissue, is blood vessels. And I'm going to be pointing this out in some of the real slides that we'll be looking at in just a little while. Also notice that when we look at a cell, most of the cell is all of this, which is that big droplet of triglyceride. So that's your fat. It is not just free inside the cell, it's actually contained within a vesicle, but that vesicle takes up most of that cell, and all of cellular organelles that we have been learning about is packed into the side of that cell right there. So most of the cell is composed of that big droplet of fat. So this is a very typical view you would expect to see if you're looking at adipose tissue. And so it's fairly easy to identify once you understand that this is your typical view. So this is a drawing, of course. Again, same thing. Here's your triglycerides. You can see that it is contained within a vesicle. So we have that vesicle, and then here's the membrane of the cell there. Again, we've got our blood vessels. So this is something that we're going to look at, and also the fact that we have all the cellular organelles pushed off to the side. A very typical kind of view for adipose tissue. So here it is. This is a low magnification. We can see the cells right here. We can see they're all closely packed together. Notice the kind of irregular shape that these cells, they're not round. Some of them are approaching round, but most of them have this kind of flat surface when they're in contact with their neighboring cells. Here, flat, flat, flat. So this is a very quick diagnostic characteristic you can use. So you can see a lot of cells with these flat surfaces as they come into contact with their neighbors. They kind of flatten out, and they're not these perfectly round cells. Let's take a look at this again a little bit closer now. Same thing, we get these kind of flat surfaces here. This is a little bit irregular, but still fairly flat, flat. Okay, so we get this pattern. And then we get these dark regions here, here. That's the nuclei. So that's the nuclei of the cells that are being pushed off to the edge. And again, we can see that most of the cell contains that big droplet of fat. Okay, let's move on. Again, another view, very typical. Again, we get this mosaic appearance with the cells all closely packed together. And now this is a nice one here because what you're looking at is a very close high magnification of adipose tissue. So here's a typical cell right there. Okay. That's the cell. And the nucleus is not very clear in this one. You can see the nucleus here, but most of them, the nucleus is not clear. But I want to draw your attention to this right here. That is a capillary, and here's a couple others right down here. So you're going to talk about, when you get into the circulatory system, you're going to have a whole chapter devoted to blood vessels. And you'll learn that there are arteries, there are arterioles, there's capillaries, venules, and veins. The arterioles are the smallest vessel leading into a capillary. And here you see a nice example. I'm sorry, this is the capillary. I apologize. So this is the capillary. So what this is composed of is, in this case, two squamous cells forming a circle around that structure to create the capillary. And adipose tissue has a lot of capillaries. We don't see them too well here. There's blood vessels there, here, blood vessels here. There's a blood vessel here. So there's a lot of blood vessels when we look at adipose tissue. Let's take a look at, there's another view. Again, less magnification, but I'm hoping that you're beginning to see that basic pattern. Here's a nice view. Again, capillary. And over here, this, you can see the difference between that and this. So this appears to be a little bit thicker. There are more cells involved with the manufacturing of this structure. This is my capillary. It's a single cell, flat cell, forming a circle to create a tube or a tunnel. Here we have several cells and smooth muscle cells composing. This would be an arteriole here. This is probably a venule. Why? How do I tell the difference? Because arterioles tend to have a smaller diameter. They tend to be more round. Venules tend to be a little bit flatter and have a bigger lumen. Okay, so this is just something I'm pointing out. I'm not going to ask you to identify this in any of the tests, but it's an opportunity for you to see this when you go further in 40B and you start talking about these capillaries. At least you'll have some idea of what they might look like. All right, so here we are, adipose tissue. Let's get this a little bit closer. So adipose tissue, composed of adipocytes. That's the name of the cells, adipocytes. storage of triglycerides. That's what they contain. And let's see. There is something called brown adipose tissue. We're not going to talk about this too much in the lab. I'll touch on this in the lecture, though. Just keep that in mind. And it's being identified here. So if you want to take a look at that in the description, you can go back and look at this. So location. Wherever areolar connective tissue is located. Okay. Subcutaneous layer deep to the skin. Around the heart and the kidneys. Yellow bone marrow. Padding around joints and behind the eyeball in the eye socket. Okay. Functions. Reduces heat loss. Serves as an energy reserve. Supports and protects organs. Okay. And then they talk about that brown adipose tissue, which generates heat to maintain proper body temperature in newborns. That is what I was talking about in the lecture. So I'm pointing it out here, but I will not test you on that idea in the labs. All right, dense regular connective tissue. Let's take a look at that. Dense regular connective tissue is composed mostly of fibers with cells. In this case, they're going to be fibroblasts. The fibers are collagen, and because of the terminology, dense regular connective tissue, the fibers are all running in the same direction. So they're all parallel to each other, as you can see here. Parallel. And that means that they're arranged in the direction of stress or pulling. So the tendon is being pulled in this direction. And so all the fibers are arranged in that direction, okay? Because that's where it's going to be pulled, in that direction. So all the fibers lining up to give that strength, okay? Same thing down here. The direction of pull is going to be there, and that means that the fibers are all lined up in this direction. And you can see them lined up in that direction in the image. Again, all the fibers are running in the same direction. Dense, because we have a lot of fibers. Regular, because they're all running in the same direction. And then there's the scattered fibroblast that you can see right here. Okay, there I am. So you can see there, fibroblast, fibroblast. So this is that thing I talked about, the river of worms. And I think we can look at the next picture. There it is, the river of worms. So these dark things that you see here, those are the fibroblasts embedded between the fibers. So they're all lined up in the same direction because the fibers are all lined up in the same direction. So we get these dark slashes all lined up, river of worms. That's the way I like to think about this tissue. If you see that pattern, you're talking about dense regular connective tissue because the fibers are running in this direction here, because that's the direction of stress. Okay? So dense regular connective tissue. Same thing here. In this case, the fibers are running in this direction. Okay? You can see the same basic pattern. These areas would be where the fibroblasts are. So there's a fibroblast. And not quite the same sort of river of worms, but the pattern is there. Everything parallel, everything parallel. Okay. Same thing. Here's my cells. Those are the fibroblasts. Okay. And then I get my fibers all running parallel to each other. And you can see they're quite densely packed together. So dense, regular, connective tissue. Same thing. Slightly different view. Same thing. There's my fibroblast. The fibers are running in this direction. Dense, regular, connective tissue. Same thing. Okay. So I'm showing you a lot of images because there are slight differences. You have to be able to identify those the slight differences and put it into the same category. So dense, regular connective tissue forms this shiny white extracellular matrix. So when you're eating something like a chicken bone, sometimes you get across you run across that very shiny white tough material. What you're looking at is dense regular connective tissue. Okay, so location forms tendons which attach muscle to bone. form ligaments, which attach bone to bone. And aponeurosis, these are flat-like tendons, like a sheet of paper, rather than like a rope-like structure. Okay, so provide strong attachment between various structures. That's the function of this type of connective tissue. Dense, irregular. Dense, irregular. So that's what we're going to take a look at now. Again, we've got the density going, but now we don't run the fibers all in the same direction. So let's take a look. So the fibers are going to run in multiple directions. We don't get that nice pattern, that nice flowy pattern that we saw with dense, regular connective tissue. In fact, we get this kind of disruptive sort of feel to things. So this is running, the fibers are running this direction here, and these fibers are coming right out at you. So it's like a pipe straight, looking straight at you. So again, so we get the longitudinal fibers that are running this direction, and then this is the end of a fiber that's running in your direction. So it would be coming straight out of the page directly at you. So they're crisscrossing, irregular in this situation. And of course, obviously a blood vessel. Okay, so here are the fibers that are running laterally, and then these are the fibers that are coming straight out at you. So now you can start to begin to see the pattern that's being set up here. So we get fibers that are running in this direction, and then fibers that are coming straight out at you. So here coming straight out at you, and then running parallel to or laterally to your side view of this image. Same thing, a little bit less clear, but you can see that the pattern is very irregular, and we don't get that nice flowy kind of river of worms that you saw with the other one. So let's move on. Okay, so dense, irregular connective tissue. So usually irregularly arranged with a few fiber. So again, we're talking about collagen fibers. So often occurs in sheets such as fascia, fascia. That's tissue beneath the skin and around muscles and other organs. So it is part of what we call fascia. And the reticular region of the dermis, and fibrous pericardium of the heart, periosteum of the bone, perichondrium of cartilage, joint capsules, membrane capsules around various organs such as the kidneys, the liver, testes, lymph nodes, and also it's the heart valves. Okay. So we talked about pericardium. That's the layer around the heart, and you will learn that there are several parts to that layer. The periosteum, peri means around, osteum means bone. So this is a layer around bone. That's dense, irregular connective tissue. Peri meaning around, chondrium refers to cartilage. So around the cartilage. Okay. Joint capsules, membranes around various organs, and the heart valves. Okay. Strength provides tensile strength, meaning it resists pulling in multiple directions. More than one direction. Ooh, look at me. I'm so clever. I'm really doing this now. I'm getting carried away. Somebody stop me. Ah! Yeah, more than one direction. That's what you get with this kind of, the strength is oriented in more than one direction. So this, what they're calling that is tensile strength. Many directions. There it is. Many directions. All right, hyaline cartilage. Let's do it. So hyaline cartilage, as you can see here, it's this typically purple, hazy, extracellular material with these little islands that seem to be embedded within that material. And those islands are spaces in which the cells that produce the matrix are found, the chondrocyte. So they're living inside this little cave surrounded by the matrix that they've produced. And you get this kind of pattern. So you get this sort of color background with the openings scattered throughout it. So here it is. So we get the space in which the cells are living, and then we get the extracellular material. Now there are fibers here, but you cannot see them. So you're not going to be able to identify fibers, but they are present in this tissue. They're simply hidden by the material that makes up the extracellular ground substance. So here's a typical view. Where is the cartilage in this view? Because not everything that you're looking at is cartilage. So from here to here, this blue area in between those two lines, that area, that's your cartilage. You can see the pattern. Little small round islands surrounded by this kind of bluish purplish material. That is the ground substance. Okay. So as you recall in the lecture presentation part, I talked about Jimi Hendrix. So purple haze, there's the purpleness. Purpleness reminds me of Jimi Hendrix, and hence I call this Jimi Hendrix. Now remember, cartilage is surrounded by dense irregular connective tissue. Do I see it here? Absolutely. Dense irregular connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue. So it's surrounded by that capsule. Okay, let's move on. So here is the capsule. This is dense irregular connective tissue, and all of this is your cartilage. This is other stuff. Okay. So this is epithelial tissue, and this is connective tissue. Connective tissue, epithelial tissue. So I think this is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial tissue, but I don't know exactly where this came from, so I'm not quite sure. Don't know where the sample came from, but that's what it looks like. All right, again, typical cartilage. You get the circle, the lacunae, as they're referred to, and then you get the matrix surrounding it. You get the circular structures and the matrix around it. And the matrix typically is going to have this kind of purplish hue to it. Once again, where is the cartilage? The cartilage is between here and here. This is dense irregular connective tissue. This is dense irregular connective tissue, and it encapsulates that cartilage. Okay. I will talk about this later on, but this right here is smooth muscle tissue. Okay, so there's my capsule. And within that capsule, you have the cartilage. This is epithelial tissue that's been pulled away from here. So it's been pulled in this direction. And this is the trachea, actually, because the trachea, as you'll learn, has about 16 to 20 C-shaped pieces of cartilage that hold the trachea open. This is the inside of the lung, so this is simple squamous epithelium. Yeah. Once again, cartilage. There's my connective tissue. All of this is the cartilage. Same pattern, holes, purplish hue. It's very distinctive. Again, there's the lacunae. There is my ground substance. Again, you cannot see the fibers, but they're present. Same thing, capsule, capsule, cartilage. Okay. Lung tissue up here. And again, this is the trachea. Muscle tissue, 3 different types of muscle tissue. We're going to look at each one. So first one is this, skeletal muscle tissue. Notice the striations that we see running across here. The light, dark pattern, that's called striation. And that's typical of skeletal muscle. We see that the nuclei are pushed out to the edge of the cell, and that each cell contains more than one nucleus. 1, 2, 3 nuclei. And they're cylindrical in shape. They're like a column. Okay? So that's typical of skeletal muscle tissue. That's striations. Okay. So there we are. Let's take a look at the next one. So skeletal muscle function is motion, posture, heat production, and protection. That's skeletal muscle. Usually attached to bones by tendons. So there are some muscles that are attached to other muscles. So that's why they're saying usually. Smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is found, for example, around the walls of blood vessels, arteries in particular. And we've got this kind of worm-like shape. We do not have striations. Okay. So when we put this together, we get this pattern right here. So from here to here, that is smooth muscle tissue. That is smooth muscle tissue right here. So the cells, you can see, have this kind of like worm-like appearance. And so this is a pretty consistent pattern. And if you see this kind of pattern, we're talking about smooth muscle. Again, from here to here, this layer is smooth muscle. Here's a nice, let's see if I can find, there's a nice kind of cell right there. Kind of long, tapered cell. There's another long, tapered cell. Okay. Smooth muscle. So smooth muscle consists of fibers, usually involuntary, not striated, non-striated. Okay, where iris of the eyes, walls of hollow internal structures such as blood vessels, airways, lungs, stomach, intestines, gallbladder, urinary bladder, and the uterus. Okay, so motion, movement. So this is cardiac muscle tissue. So cardiac muscle tissue is also striated. You can see it more clearly here in the drawing, striations. It is branched. The cells are branched. They have a centrally located nuclei. So you can see here these little lines that you're looking at there and there. Those are called the intercalated discs. So those are special junctions between cells. You can see it here and here, and it's being pointed out right there. Intercalated disc. So we can see the striations in this image. We have a centrally located nucleus, and these dark lines that you see right here, those represent the intercalated disc. That's where one cell, one skeletal muscle cell, cardiac muscle cell is connected to another one. Again, centrally located nucleus. We get the striations. They're very light, but you can see that they are there. Same thing. This is here. Look at this. Nice image of the striations in this part of the image. We see the centrally located nucleus. We see some branching here. So we get some branching here. We see the intercalated discs here. They're all over the place. I'm just pointing out a number of them, as you can see throughout this image. The branching pattern is not always easily seen. It's present, but not always easily seen. So because the cells get closely packed together and they get squished together, and you don't have a chance to see how they're branching. It gets obscured in the closely packed cells. So here again, we see again the striations, the centrally located nuclei, and we see the connections between cells. These are the intercalated discs. So pretty clear what we're looking at here. what's it? Oh, this, no, there's a branching right there. Okay, so we see some branching right there. Maybe a little bit right here as well. So again, intercalated disc, centrally located nuclei, and the striations are present. Oh, there's a nice branch right there too. It is sometimes possible to see that. Not always, but if you look at enough, you can see branching taking place there. Okay. All right, let's take a look. All right, so cardiac muscle tissue, branched, striated fibers. Okay? Usually one centrally located nucleus. Occasionally you can have more than one. And they have these special intercalated discs which connect one cell to the other. Where do we find it? Obviously the heart, and its job is to pump blood. Okay? So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I have for you today. I will start posting the lecture for tissues pretty soon, hopefully this week. Good luck, and I will see you in class.